Well, listeners, even Bill Kristol wants Palin to shut the F up about impeachment. She makes Republicans look extreme, he says, and goes on to state that the Weekly Standard editor, Bill Kristol, may have thrust Sarah Palin into the national spotlight by being one of the first to push for her to be vice president in 2008, but he has now decided that she makes Republicans look extreme because she called to impeach President Barack Obama. In a column on the conservative website Breitbart last week, the former Alaska governor argued that it was time to impeach, and on behalf of American workers and legal immigrants of all backgrounds, we should oppose any politician on the left or right who would hesitate in voting for articles of impeachment. His unsecured border crisis is the last straw that makes the battered wife say, "No mas," she insisted. Oh. President Obama's rewarding of lawlessness, including his own, is the foundational problem here. Well, as I have already reported, on Friday, Attorney General Eric Holder dismissed Palin's calls for impeachment in an interview with ABC News, and goes on to say that Holder stated she wasn't a particularly good vice presidential candidate. She's an even worse judge of who ought to be impeached and why. But Kristol seemed to agree during an ABC News panel discussion today, Sunday. No responsible Republican official has called for impeachment, he explained. And one problem with it is, of course, is you just get Joe Biden as president. The Republican task is to elect a Republican Senate and to elect a Republican president in 2016, not to create a phony issue that allows Democrats to make Republicans look extreme. Republican strategist Ann Navarro agreed that nobody of responsibility, nobody in leadership, nobody of relevance has talked about impeachment. So we can stick to talking about people who can actually make something happen, say, and not just folks who want to make headlines. Former White House senior advisor David Plouffe pointed out that Republicans reap what they sow because their attitude about the president has resulted in voters who wanted to see him impeached. Break this news.
Sarah Palin calling for impeachment over this issue.
Enough is enough of the years of abuse from this president. His unsecured border crisis, for me, it's the last straw. It makes kind of a battered wife say, "No mas, that's enough. It's time to impeach."
She wasn't a particularly good vice presidential candidate. She's an even worse judge of who want to be impeached and why. It's not surprising that Eric Holder would hold that view. I was a little bit surprised how clear Robert Goodlatte was today on that, saying no impeachment. And of course, Speaker Boehner was as well. I guess there's some concern. Everybody remembers 1998, impeach President Clinton. Republicans actually lose seats in the House.
And no responsible Republican elected official has called for impeachment. And one problem with it is, of course, you just get Joe Biden as president. The Republican task is to elect a Republican Senate and elect a Republican president in 2016, not to create a phony issue which allows Democrats to make Republicans look extreme. So Republicans are not going to impeach President Obama. They are, I think, going to make the case for why a Republican Senate could check President Obama in 2015 and 2016, and why a Republican president is needed to replace President Obama.
I think Bill is completely right. I mean, nobody of responsibility, nobody in leadership, nobody of relevance has talked about impeachment. The lawsuit is about constitutional powers and the separation of powers. So can we stick to talking about what people who actually can make something happen say, and not what folks who just want to make headlines say?
I think a lot of Democrats want them to keep talking about it.
Of course.
Well, they reap what they sow here. So leaders are being somewhat responsible, but they've fomented all this out there. I actually think if you look at the Iowa Republican caucus attenders and the South Carolina primary voters, I bet you have majorities in the Republican electorate saying he ought to be impeached. So that's what you're dealing with out there.
And you also have a majority of people saying they don't want to hear another word from Sarah.
I saw that poll this week.